Now we'll move on to a topic that came up in several presentations, and I think it's a very important one when talking about how we scale up all kinds of efforts that we are undertaking, whether it's in permaculture, agroecology, agroforestry, which is how do we disseminate both knowledge and practices when we are actually encountering a massive drop both in the number of farms and in the number of farmers, as well as in the we are noticing a rise in the average age of farmers, in the population of farmers in Europe. So I will continue now to the last presentation, which I will do myself. Let me just say that I'm not currently in the capacity as a researcher. I'm a practitioner of education with various organizations in Poland and in collaboration internationally. So I will be speaking more from what I'm seeing is happening and where I see a dynamic flow and engagement. And my background is in social anthropology. Specifically, I studied practical enskillment and knowledge transmission. So at the moment, with the background as a grower myself and now as an educator, I'd like to propose several constructive directions forward and give you examples of what we're doing here in Poland. And I hope you will enjoy seeing some of these. I named my presentation Polycultures of Learning, partly to relate to the theme of our conference, but partly also to call out a need and for a recognition of different modalities, both in terms of frameworks which are being developed to address sustainable agriculture in the times of the climate crisis, and in terms of different modalities of learning. And by modalities of learning, I actually mean that we do not only learn, and specifically farming, in terms of knowledge transfer that is theoretical, although that has become a dominant paradigm, especially in formal farming schooling, but we learn farming with our bodies. We learn farming processually, so it takes time being embedded in the environment. We learn farming through relationships and observing different relationships. And there's an element of farming knowledge which is very, very dynamic and non-static, which means that we're learning about life processes as they are interacting with each other. And also we're learning about ecosystem processes which are now dramatically changing. So why talk about learning, farming, and trust? Because in my abstract, I address this topic by claiming that actually in current global and local situation, the focus on trust is primary, and especially in learning, it is primary because it depends on a relationship either between practitioners or between a person and a place, and a person to oneself. And first of all, we need trust in the knowledge that we have, that this knowledge will work. And when we talk about knowledge, we talk about generating, transmitting, and reproducing knowledge. Currently, we're in a particular model of education, broadly speaking, that favorizes a reproduction of knowledge. But in farming, which is so context specific, it is which involves many years of observation of natural seasonal cycles, the transmission of knowledge from one person to another and within a community is invaluable. And in addition, generating knowledge is incredibly significant, because the knowledge of a farmer is very personal to his farm, to the local agricultural landscape context, to the economic context in which he's generating income from his produce. So it really is a very dynamic knowledge. Second of all, we need to talk about trust, because in the context of climatic uncertainty, where we are adapting and innovating our methods to suit what we have, what damage we already have in the environment, and to the failures of the environment to basically yield and produce, basically soil loss, biodiversity loss, etc. We need to find a new model for trusting each other and trusting on a local level. This links to the third point, which is about changing context and patterns of knowledge transmission, because what we have seen over the past half a century is the gradual move towards generating knowledge in spaces that are separate from the places of where this knowledge is practiced. So we see, for example, seeds being evolved in laboratories and being supplied to farmers as the climate resilient seeds. But these seeds have not been tested in the local context. We need farmers themselves to be conversing with scientists, and we need the dialogue that will enable that knowledge to arise anew. And very important point that I want to make, and I will return to this in the end, is that specifically in farming, there is no farming knowledge without contact with earth. It really requires practicing on one's own skin and really developing an intuitive, embodied knowledge of how the environment and natural processes behave to become fluent and expert practitioner. So why does it all matter? Well, it matters because without knowledge, and I'll use food sovereignty framework, without knowledge how to produce own food, on a societal level, we lose our food sovereignty. We lose actually a capacity to feed ourselves. It also matters because food has been a critical issue for almost every rise and collapse of political and economic systems. So when we have an overabundance, it's very easy to forget, like we see now, that the food actually is the food growing is a living process, and not just manufacturing of commodities that follows the same linear productive pattern as other branches of industries. We also need to bring to conversation and confront the myths, the premises, the challenges, and the proposals of different paradigms of knowledge, and see that there are power imbalances between them. Because the peasant way that has been largely devalued in the process of modernization by agri-trade innovation, by the green revolutions, and the paradigm of scientifically informed agricultural knowledge, this peasant way has a lot of commonalities with permaculture, with agroecology, and with localized biodiverse economic systems. The peasant way has not been deficient. It has been very effective for its own context. So when we want to scale up, we want to do what Naomi has mentioned before. The scaling up is a distributed scaling up. It's very context dependent. So the learning also needs to rely and needs to trust the local practitioners. So sorry, I've skipped one slide here. It's also important to recognize that we have a plurality and diversity of new so-called farmers. We have people coming from the city who have not had the country-based background. We have, and these cultures of farming and of ideas about farming and the values about farming are confronted. So the trust is really important so that the best of practices and ideas can be met. And really what we're speaking about is not something purely hypothetical. It is backed by a conversation between global organizations at the level of Food and Agriculture Organization, which is proposing that actually the innovation in agroecology needs to be based on a conversation between different stakeholders, and needs to use a very participatory method of learning what is the local challenge and what is the local solution. So just to bring and tease out a little bit where I'm drawing from, it's to really say that farming is a very special kind of knowledge. It is like craft, but it is not quite, because it doesn't work just with one type of matter. It works with an entire array of physical, biological and chemical processes in environment. It is not a static picture. It is an evolving process, and we are seeing that with climate change. It is also a learning and knowledge that has a very immersed quality to it, because the knowledge is generated and is absorbed with all senses. And this has been especially emphasized by Biodynamic School, by Reto Ingold from Switzerland, and in Poland by Ecological Folk Highschool. It is also a community process that involves working on ethics. So knowledge is not just something that we can, again, sell, bracket, stamp, and frame as a rigid property. It is common heritage of all of us. And so what we are advocating in Poland among a collaboration of educational organizations is a very open license, open source attitude to farming knowledge, one that is co-created and verified by different practitioners. I would like to now go on to 3 case studies and briefly describe what they do and what we're learning from them. These are 3 initiatives in Poland that have been engaged in developing farm-based, hands-on education and knowledge exchanges. Here I would like to say that there are different modalities of this learning. Some are peer-to-peer, we call them farmer-to-farmer, campesino a campesina. Some are, and they are horizontal. They can be also intergenerational and in between different types of farming methods, like between permaculture farmers and between agroforestry farmers. They can be also hierarchical, which means that we are looking to recreate new lines of knowledge transfer from those who have spent 15 to 20 years on their farms, developing their market farm models, to novices who are coming without much experience or with experience in conventional farming. One of those institutions and organizations, Ecological Folk Highschool. So you can see the logo of the initiative in the right hand corner. This is a 2-year course in organic agriculture in Poland that is based on long-term apprenticeships. And in those apprenticeships, students who often come from urban backgrounds stay for an extended period of time with a farmer and a farmer's family, and develop a relationship of trust based on committing to the work in exchange for receiving knowledge. The challenges of such education is that one has to experience the enmeshment in family and working routines, which are often very specific to the given family and farm. Also, one has to give up nearly 2 years of working and generating income for oneself. The apprenticeships are not yet funded by the government, and the qualification of ecological or organic farmer is not recognized. So what you get in farming schools conventional, which are over 60 in Poland, formal agricultural schools, vocational schools, is that mostly the students come from farms, and their apprenticeship is validated based on the place where they live. In this situation, where you enter a completely new farm, you are challenged to meet the model of knowledge you already have, or the model of practice, with a completely new operational system. So this is very refreshing, but also a very challenging model. And what is important here is that by living in a place and being totally immersed in a farm environment, seeing how the farmers work, how they organize their routines, how they engage with the market, how they think about the price, how they choose the time where to sow, why they wash things the way they do. So why they use a sprinkle versus soaking vegetables in the water, like very fine differences. The person is becoming a different kind of person. It is not just a process of acquiring knowledge, it is a process of becoming a different kind of person. And the Ecological Folk High School, by creating a community of students who meet sequentially, additionally supports this process of reflection about who am I becoming, what farm do I want to establish, what will be its profile, what are my specialization interests. Another approach that has been developed in the course of the last 4 years in Poland has been in the permaculture network. And it is an approach where short courses take place on farms, and they gather usually groups of people who are at a pre-newcomer stage. So they either have a place that they would like to manage ecologically for food production, for themselves or for income generating, or they are just beginning to dream. And these workshops, especially in Permacultura Edu model, they use farms as meeting places where a farm that is also on the threshold of growing and emerging, drawing its own design, uses the group who's coming to look inward on itself. In return, the people on site, who come to the workshop take place in a micro design process. So they learn the basic principles of the design of a farm from permaculture perspective, as well as they get the so-called startup kit of basic skills. So they learn the basic skills of soil, seed sowing, and plant growing, basic crop rotation system. And they get a growth map for themselves, how to develop this knowledge so that they can go through the first season and actually have a success. So whoever comes to this workshop can actually start up something that will last. And the benefit of this learning, where you build a group for a short time, you use tools that allow people to observe in real life together, share their reflection, share their observation. And also you use different envisioning skills where people share their ideas and they can confront with each other critical questions and doubts. It's a very useful space for generating knowledge, ideas, and sharing practices. So here on the right, you've seen the design process. And the last example I would like to bring is inspired by Scuola Campesina, which is a food sovereignty organization and agroecology training center near FAO, near Rome, and our Polish equivalent, which is AGRO-PERMA-LAB. It's a multi-stakeholder dialogue of diverse knowledges. This is a kind of training and educational experience here in Poland in which we have learned that by bringing together people from very diverse sectors who still share the interest or stakes in agriculture and food system. We are creating a very special place for new ideas to develop and for developing a shared vision of how we reorganize our food system. So this is a slightly different scale from the methods that are on the ground, but this is an equally important learning space. And in the training, in particular, we focus on listening and feeling. So whilst sharing in a scientifically accurate way the knowledge from different experts, we have 20 participants from different organizations, 20 experts who are based in institutions or organizations in Poland. We provide a space for dialogue so that people can reflect and comment from their own context on broader themes, from climate to solidarity economy, agriculture and food markets, ways of collaborating between organizations, etc. We also take particular attention to leadership skills, because people who are already based in organizations can develop further their way of sharing knowledge and strengthen the younger generation in their communities. We are also very much emphasizing that the relationships between us have to be based on friendships. And this comes back to the topic of trust, that we are not looking for some kind of short model of solutions. We are looking to develop long-term community that will be healthy and will take care of each other as in a family. And lastly, what's important for us is that we are developing intergenerational and international collaboration, which in a country like Poland, where we have seen such a dramatic difference of cultures between the pre-market transformation culture, like the culture of communism, and the 1990s and post-2000 culture. These are very different cultures of communicating, value systems. So we need the trust to converse with each other and the respect that is needed for that. So I will head towards the end now, and I will turn towards some insights for more agroecological and permaculture farms and farmers based on our learning experience in Poland. First, what we are seeing is that we are getting most when we are open to synergies of different methods, but synergies where we maintain precision and do not become too dogmatic about one or another model. So someone can practice permaculture. We want to see openness towards a dialogue, but we want to see coherence and consistency and reliability of what is being said and what is being done, because that can yield knowledge that is worth replicating. We also want to appreciate multimodal nature of learning in farming, so senses, relationships, feeling, scientific data, conversation between different practitioners and researchers. We want to acknowledge plurality of knowers, including our grandmothers, who in Poland are still very knowledgeable bearers of peasant knowledge, because knowledge of farming does not stop on the field. It goes on to how we preserve food, how we make it last, how we derive better nutritional and culinary qualities from what we produce in the garden. We also want to cultivate a social vision of agriculture. So community-supported agriculture, food cooperatives, these are the models that not only serve the education, especially education of consumers, but also start recognizing that we all have shared stakes in how the food is grown and how it impacts the environment. So all of us have to be invested in this topic from very early, like kindergarten level, to ongoing lifelong learning of adults. We need systems view. It's critical that we understand that our local situation is not divorced from global and political and market processes. And for that, particularly food sovereignty framework, the Scola Campesina, but also other approaches like recent bond project are very, very useful. We need contact with the ground and basic hands in the soil. We have to encourage, like it was said in the UK, multiplication of small farms, small food growing, because if someone is able to produce a crop on a very small scale, the empathetic understanding of what it takes for a farmer to produce on a massive scale with very variable factors will increase exponentially. And we need that kind of attitude for the times that will come. And lastly, we need ethics of care, with which permaculture as well as agroecology promote, because learning takes place in communities of practice. And in particular, we need those communities to be localized and based on solidarity. So here I will finish my presentation. I probably went a little bit over my time, but I thank you very much for your attention. I hope the topic of education, as has been mentioned a couple of times, is important enough to be stressed over and over again.